Youth is a journey sweet and painful. Follow Rochelle, a girl searching for herself in a magical world, whose story is filled with the worries and joys of growth. 7. Don't get caught. I locked the door behind me. Knowing that someone had already broken in once today did not institute great faith in the lock to keep me safe, but the act of locking the door, at least, felt comforting. Besides, the locked door provided some privacy. Starting with my clothes, I cleared the mess. It didn't take long, as I hadn't brought a lot with me. We didn't anticipate me being undercover for more than a month. I folded the clothes, replaced them in the drawers. Refilling my makeup bag, I set it on top of the dresser. Moving on to the books, it hit me that maybe the intruder wasn't looking for anything at all. I could think of a few people who might resort to intimidation through the destruction of property. There was nothing else for an intruder to find in my belongings. A laptop was more expensive than pen and paper, too easy to trace back to the owner if lost. My plans lived in my brain rather than on paper somewhere. I would never, could never, possess a magical object. I had nothing to steal. I guess whoever ransacked my dorm found that out the hard way. The last thing I did was remake the bed. Curling under my covers did not wipe away the violation that a stranger had been in my room, had touched all of my things. One day and I'd already made enemies. So much for going unnoticed. I fell asleep feeling very alone. Plus I knew what advice my mom would give me. Let it go, you don't have time to go looking for whoever trashed your room. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. You have bigger things to worry about and a time limit to worry about them. I also knew what my dad would say. Give 'em hell, kiddo. Find them, glue all their shoes to the ceiling, and steal the backspace key from their laptop. I wished he were here. Where did you go, Ro? Emily waved a hand in my face, bringing me back to breakfast. Sorry. Didn't sleep well last night. Not a lie. I woke up several times feeling like there were eyes on me. The dorm itself was small with no good hiding places, and I checked the lock on the door each time I startled awake. At 4 a.m., I gave up trying and went back to the library. Orville snorted. Can't imagine why, in a room all by yourself. Must have had something to do with your roommate snoring. Oh wait, that's my roommate, he said, smacking Joseph lightly on the arm. They bickered for another minute. I focused on my pancake, thinking about my list. The library was a good place to think, and I'd spent my morning in the quiet, making a list of the people who might want to search my stuff. It came down to motivation. Why would someone trash my room? I had two answers. Either they were looking for something or they wanted to intimidate me. The four people on my list were Jackson, Miley, Ms. Williams, and Emily. The last was a long shot. Emily had been nothing but kind to me, but what if she had taken me under her wing so that she could keep an eye on me for another reason? Jackson would have wanted to intimidate me. I knew he was supposed to attend a fundraiser last night, so he might not have had time to do it himself, but I'm sure he could bribe an underclassman to do it. Ms. Williams would have the same motivation. She was only on the list under the assumption that Jackson had told her who and what I was, which he'd said he didn't want. Both were unlikely, though I didn't rule them out. Miley seemed the obvious offender. Nothing says stay away from my man like making a mess of someone else's room. Scarlett bumped my shoulder with hers, drawing my attention again. You gonna finish that? She pointed to my fruit cup. Have at it. I pushed it over to her. Though I'd skipped dinner last night, I wasn't hungry. Breakfast at Beatrice Potts Magiscola was as extensive as yesterday's lunch had been. I just didn't have the stomach for it this morning. Perk up, kid, Orville said to me. He spoke gently, like I was fragile and needed coddling. He also called me kid, as if we weren't in the same year, at the same school, and probably very nearly the same age. It's only day 2 for you. You can't give up yet. Giving up wasn't part of my vocabulary. I wouldn't know when to give up if someone delivered instructions with pictures. This is my formulating a plan face, I said with a smile. Scarlett chuckled around her fruit. Orville just patted my shoulder and went back to his breakfast. I was grateful he hadn't asked any question I hadn't meant to divulge that I was making plans. Emily, of course, wasn't about to let me off the hook that easily. A plan for what? I searched for a suitable lie. Making the most out of my time at Beatrice Potts. I have a lot to catch up on. Noise in the cafeteria started to wane as students headed off for the first class of the day. I wasn't keen on seeing Jackson and his cloud of popular kids, no matter how interesting I found the history of magic. Our group wasn't the last to leave the caf. Several other tables were still occupied by stragglers. Jackson and his friends among them. Of course. When I'd entered the cafeteria with Emily, I'd clocked Jackson's group immediately. Theirs was the only table people seemed to gravitate to and around, like gnats to a bug zapper. Naturally, I took my breakfast to the table and sat where I could keep an eye on his group. Sitting across from Joseph, Maria, and Emily, I had an excellent view of the popular kids. That meant every time I looked over at them, there was a chance Jackson might make eye contact, and he did. It happened too many times before I finally quit looking. Was he watching me? I had hoped I wouldn't have to see him until our first class, and even then I'd planned not to arrive until the last possible moment. Maybe Jackson had the same thought. Who would prove to be the most stubborn, and who would leave the caf first? Only time would tell. If you want to make up for lost time, you can join our Omega Club. Emily started to gather her trash, ready to get on with the day. Scarlett choked on her fruit. Whoa, Em, cool it with the secret spilling over there. A defensive frown took over Emily's face. What? I get one invite, and I choose Rochelle. You chose me, and look how great it turned out. But? Orville shot me a side glance, questioning whether to continue with me in earshot. There was no point in trying to hide the confusion on my face. Are you sure they'll let her in? No offense, Ro. Not everybody qualifies for Omega, which is a super secret, by the way, and I thought Emily knew what that meant. And if you don't pass, well, they have ways to make you forget you ever heard the name. MS. Williams has to approve her after yesterday's commender class. I cringed in anticipation of the next question. What happened in your commender? Joseph followed Emily's example. Another table across the caf emptied. I caught Jackson's eye again. Damn it. Emily smirked. You missed Rochelle defending against a psionic attack with an earthquake that shook the entire arena without even breaking a sweat. That was you. Maria sounded incredulous. Her question stunned me. I could only imagine the open-mouthed, wide-eyed look on my face. Maria felt the need to clarify. During last period yesterday, the whole building shook. The earthquake vibrated my runes off the table. I even heard some kids saying that stuff in their dorms had shifted. She asked again, that was you. Reality smacked me in the face. I should never have come here. Magic and nulls didn't mix. If I didn't get myself killed, I'd end up bringing down the school. How was I going to get myself out of this one? Shrugging, I lied with the truth. I got lucky, honestly. I've never done anything like that before. She was poking me in the brain with an invisible finger. All I wanted was for her to not be able to do that anymore. Baller, Joseph whispered. Only I knew that, had he known the truth, the awe in his voice would have been fear. A pit formed in my stomach. I liked that someone thought I was powerful. People didn't appreciate nulls, they certainly didn't think we were baller. It won't happen again, I promised, covering the absolute truth in my words with light-hearted criticism and a smile. Beginner's luck. Whatever you say, kid. Orville smiled down at me, the only one still seated. He, Maria, Joseph, and Scarlett all had commended to kick off the day, while Emily and I were off to history. You ready to go? Emily looked at me expectantly. I didn't blame her, we were dangerously close to being late. Prolonging the inevitable would do me no good. At this point, I could only hope to beat Jackson et al. To the classroom and avoid having to interact with them. We were 2 doors down from Mrs. Diana's room when Jackson caught up to us. Without turning around, Emily bumped my arm with hers and whispered, "Just ignore him." She was back to being the soft-spoken girl who stood up for Knowles yesterday. My confident new friend had disappeared. What had Jackson done to her? For the most part, I tried not to think about Jackson Lenore. I had a hard enough time reconciling the vast changes in him without having to look at him too. It was easier to just follow Emily's advice and ignore him. If only he would ignore me in return. We had to slow to open the classroom door. Doing so took precious seconds that allowed Jackson to get close enough to whisper in my ear. His warm breath on my neck sent shivers down my spine. Don't get caught. I didn't know if it was a warning or a threat. 8. It's just a crush. Growing up, my mom let me watch old movies about high schools where the teachers fell into one of 2 categories, caring and perfect, or dispassionate and cruel, and the students were either popular, or they weren't. We would curl up in front of the TV on our second-hand sofa or, after Dad disappeared, in the back of our van huddled around a laptop, and devour those old movies. My whole life wasn't just training and homeschooling. Mom and I had fun, too, we just did it without magic. Life wasn't like those movies, but there was a certain type of magic to them. To tell a story to be in charge of the characters and the plot is to have power. I liked the idea of being powerful despite the way I was born. Many Knowles didn't live as long as I had. They certainly didn't have to worry about things like popular kids and the drama they wrought. The popular kids rarely got along with people outside their circles. This often led to the non-popular kids coming up with crazy ways to get back at the popular kids. I was deep in thought, planning how to enact my revenge on Miley for trashing my room, when Mrs. Diana called my name. Rochelle, can you give us an example of magic and technology working together? No, I was too busy imagining putting blue hair dye in Miley's shampoo bottle. Mrs. Diana looked at me expectantly. In fact, the whole class waited for me to flub the answer with hushed anticipation. I could feel the eyes of my classmates on me. I didn't have to turn to know that the snickering behind me was Miley and her friends. Airplanes. I guessed. A collective giggle rippled softly through the class. Mrs. Diana raised a silent eyebrow. Planes no longer have to rely on oil for fuel as long as there is a mage on board that can hold the weight of the plane and its occupants. Some private companies are working on a replacement for both the fuel and the mage. What I didn't add was that those companies had purchased Knowles for their experimentation. It wasn't common knowledge. Anyone involved in the program would deny it. Nobody travels by plane anymore, came a voice from the back of the room. I thought I recognized Claire's disdainful tone. You only think that because you've never gone anywhere, was Jackson's bored reply. Claire sputtered back at him. I know he did not just stick up for me. Did he? When I turned at the sound of his voice, he narrowed his eyes at me for the briefest moment, and then returned his attention to Claire. I'm sure what Rochelle meant to say was all travel has benefited from the introduction of magic. It's more sustainable, it's faster, and everyone gets where they are going when magic is used by the right people. Though his words were a dig at me, Jackson spoke to Claire. I pursed my lips to keep my opinion from spilling out into the classroom. We didn't need another scene. Instead, I turned my back to him again. Funny how I had no right to feel betrayal from Jackson. After all this time, and yet that didn't stop the pit in my stomach. Mrs. Diana continued her lesson, seemingly oblivious to the drama at the back of her classroom. More likely she hoped that by not acknowledging it the tension would fizzle out. The magical revolution lasted 16 years. It didn't take the human population long to document all of the different kinds of magic that had emerged. The revolution lasted almost 2 decades because humans couldn't agree on a power structure. Those with magic felt they should be in charge, those without disagreed. Based on Mrs. Diana's tone, I knew what camp she fell into. The first revolt against magic, led by a religious leader in Texas, started shortly after the first proven cases of magical abilities in the United States. That's when I stopped listening to her explanation of the magical revolution. The approved version of history wasn't going to cover the whole truth of that turmoil, or the years that followed, and I wasn't interested in her trivialized rendition. The videos of that Texas congregation joyfully attacking a poor elemental are still available online if you know where to look. I doubted Mrs. Diana would detail the witch hunt that ensued. My early education had extensive lessons on just how much hatred a human can harbor against their fellow humans simply because they are different. For the rest of the class, I could feel Jackson's eyes on the back of my head. He kept his distance, but I could feel his brooding presence at my back between classes, just waiting for me to give myself away. I wished he wasn't so pretty. His frown, while still attractive, was an ugly mark that didn't belong on his face. It pulled attention away from his cheekbones and hid his dimple. Had he been less pretty, I might not have spent all of Rune Law looking at him from the corner of my eye. Emily stopped me on our way to lunch. Let's go see if Ms. Williams is in her office so we can ask about Omega. I'd totally forgotten about the Omega Club. There was no way Ms. Williams would approve me for club membership after she tested me as minor herself. The smells of fresh bread wafted down the hall, but something in Emily's voice made me pause. Besides, you are Jackson bait for some reason. Ah, there it was. She didn't want to spend any more time with Jackson than I did. Not a member of the Jackson Lenore fan club. She flinched. It's not that, she said quickly. Our group doesn't get a lot of attention from the popular kids, and if Jackson comes over to our table every day, they might get the wrong impression. I could tell she was lying. What did he do to you? I kept my voice low so the students passing us in the hall could not overhear. Emily just shifted her weight, looking at her shoes. Did he hurt you? No. Her shout awarded us some weird looks, but nobody approached to ask what she was yelling about. Quieter, Emily explained, look, when we both first got here, we were friends. He was really broken up about his sister's death, and I was convenient. Then he got hot and popular, and didn't need me anymore. She paused to take a shaky breath that made me question if she had ever admitted this secret. It's just a crush, okay, she said after a minute. A little unrequited love never killed anybody. I didn't think that was strictly true, but this wasn't the time to correct her. As much as I wanted to tell her that I, too, was one of Jackson's cast-offs, I knew better. Just like I knew better than to plan revenge for my room, or to join a school club. And yet. Let's go see Ms. Williams. I smiled at Emily. She deserved to be loved and cherished, and, at least for now, I could give her that. The knowledge that she was about to waste her one-time-only invitation on me, when I had no chance at making it into the club, weighed on my conscience. I was honored to be asked, which only made it worse. Friends were rare in my life, and I didn't want to disappoint Emily. You owe me lunch though. If I get hangry and blow stuff up, that's on you. I was only kind of kidding. 9. Stay that way forever. The reason I had picked the Beatrice Potts Magiscola was for the world-famous underground arena. There were wards in the walls, on the floors, in the windows, but the arena was built to take a hit from unpracticed mags. The perfect place for a null in disguise. I'd spent months comparing the Magiscolas along the East Coast. It had to check all my boxes. Be close enough that I could escape back to our home near Bear Mountain in New York, have a library worth studying, and be far enough away from a town or city where I might, if provoked, lose control and hurt a whole lot of people. Beatrice Potts fit the bill. My presentation to Mom had been chock full of the counterpoint to every argument I thought my mother would throw at me, but, in the end, she agreed without any hesitation. That's how I knew she hadn't given up on finding my dad. The major point in my presentation, for why I need to go undercover, was the underground arena. There's no better place to practice magic than underneath a place that is virtually magic-proof. I theorized that any errant magic would not be able to escape the arena itself. Therefore, everyone outside would be relatively safe. My mission had two goals: to find out any information I could that might help me figure out what happened to Dad, and to learn as much as I could about controlling the magic. I'd gotten pretty good at soaking it up and siphoning it back out. Actually using magic was a different story altogether. It wasn't even in the same book. Making friends and enemies was not part of the plan. Neither was joining a secret after-school club. But as a 17-year-old whose last friend had up with no explanation and left when I was 8, I had a hard time turning down the opportunity. Can you blame me? You know this isn't how we typically do things, Ms. Williams said, looking sternly at Emily. She wore her leather boots again, and a cropped leather jacket to complete the look. The heels hadn't slowed her down at all. I wondered what Joseph and Orville thought about her today. Emily nodded. I have a good feeling about Rochelle. She smiled at me and my heart sank. In that case, you know the consequences should she fail. We'll hold her trial next week. You have until then to prepare her and yourself. A ribbon appeared in Ms. Williams's hand. The maroon fabric stood out against the blandness of the room and the black of her outfit. Until then, I need your hands. Both of you. Wordlessly, we held out our hands. Mine was palm up. Emily held hers so that her palm faced away from me. Ms. Williams took Emily's right hand and my left, corrected mine so that it mirrored Emily's, and wrapped the ribbon loosely around both of our palms. Magic gathered around Ms. Williams as she prepared to cast her spell. I could feel it surrounding her, a halo of invisible power lining her whole form. My nullness wanted it. I imagined adding an extra seal to the bottle in my mind to keep my intrinsic magic from stealing hers. Her magic leaked into her voice, making her words powerful and binding. Emily Newsom, you hereby declare responsibility for Rochelle Blakely as your charge, and initiate into the Omega Society. You will pass the test together or fail together. Together? No, I couldn't do that to Emily. The loose ribbon around my hand tightened as I struggled against it. No going back now. You will not speak of Omega to anyone except each other until such time as the test has been passed, or until the memory of the society has been wiped from your mind. Go and prepare. What had I just done to my mission? Ms. Williams removed her ribbon. Her magic shrunk back to wherever normal mags held their power. The desperation of my own magic to possess hers quieted. Then it hit me, magic was supposed to be blocked except in the arena. How had she cast her binding spell in the office? I'll see you both in Commander this afternoon, she dismissed us matter-of-factly. From the tone of her voice, you might have thought we had asked for a self-defense tip rather than induction into a secret society. We didn't speak as we left her office. I stopped Emily once the door closed on the room we'd just left. You called it a club. And you didn't tell me that if I don't get in, you get kicked out. Why would you risk yourself like that for someone you don't even know? I was grateful for the empty hallway. Despite the wards in the structure of the school, if Ms. Williams could practice magic outside of the arena, I might also be able to steal it outside of the arena. Latent power in the vicinity wasn't the only way my power recharged. Strong emotion could also loosen my control and let the greedy magic out. My worry and anxiety over what just happened made me dangerous. With only Emily in the hall, I hoped I could keep myself in check. I hoped the wards would keep it from ever becoming a problem. Emily held up one finger. Club sounds better than society. A society is for old people, and they usually end up being the bad guys. Don't you want movies? She held up a second finger. You're going to pass, so that's a non-issue. And a third finger. Like I told Ms. Williams, I have a good feeling about you. You shouldn't. Someone laughed without amusement from the stairwell across from Ms. Williams's office. The stairs that lead to the arena. You trust too easily. I heard Jackson's voice before I saw him. The tight blonde curls around Emily's face shuddered when she realized who was speaking. She looked at me with frantic eyes as if to say, "You really are a Jackson magnet." But she was cool and collected when she said, "You might have a point, jackass. There was a time when I trusted you." Jackson narrowed his eyes at her. I'd guess he wasn't used to people standing up for themselves. I crossed my arms and took a protective step in front of Emily, though I knew she didn't need it. Taking advantage of his already being off guard, I asked him, "Why are you always where I am?" His eyes flashed with something I couldn't read. "Just making sure you don't hurt anyone else." I huffed loudly over his last word, hoping Emily didn't hear it. By hanging around in dark stairwells waiting for me to pass by. That's creepy. I wasn't. Emily cut Jackson's protest short. What were you doing down there anyway? The arena is supposed to be locked when there are no classes. It's off limits. Shifting so that she was no longer behind me, Emily balled her hands into fists. I knew she wanted to let loose her illusionist power. Outside the arena, that wasn't possible. Well, it was, based on our interaction in Ms. Williams's office. But not for Emily. The wards held and there was no attack. My aunt is the commander teacher. Jackson's face softened as we watched. I told her I needed extra practice, and she agreed to unlock it during lunch. Could this be a humble, honest answer from Jackson Lenore? The guys who went from threats to teasing to sticking up for me back to threats. He smiled, just a small smile. I didn't smile back. The trust was broken, but I wanted to. Look, just don't mention you saw me, okay? I have a reputation, you know. He winked at Emily. We watched him retreat down the stairs and out of sight. It took me a moment to understand, but Jackson had done me a favor. All the strong feelings over Emily's trust in me had calmed. In that moment, I no longer felt that I could be a danger to her or to others. Emily's elbow bumped into mine, distracting me. Before you get hangry and blow me up, let's go get lunch while we still can. Assuming Joseph and Scarlett didn't eat everything already. She laughed and gestured for me to follow. I did, leaving behind all the worry about Omega and Jackson, and my unpredictable power. Right now, I was just a girl with a new friend and opportunities and a future. I wanted to stay that girl forever. Plus, in divination and arithmancy class, I copied down the instructions for tea reading. I made a mental note to look into tarot for fun, not because I thought it might help me find my dad. Ms. Williams paired me with another minor scale student. He was a minor beast. His animal forms mostly did not exceed 50 pounds. I had an easier time defending against his attacks than he did against my minor elemental offense. Not much for a large dog to do against a personal rain cloud. He made a very cute labradoodle, though. I wouldn't fall for those puppy dog eyes again, not after he nipped my arm harmlessly while I was distracted by the cuteness. Despite the number of students in the class, all of which were slinging magic back and forth and probably need more supervision than me, I felt Ms. Williams's watchful gaze on me the entire class. A reminder that if I didn't pass her test, I would ruin Emily's life at Beatrice Potts Magiscola. My partner shifted again, this time to a new animal instead of reusing the dog. He knew I wouldn't fall for it twice. I popped a small rock column out of the ground just under my partner's little skunk belly, simultaneously distracting him and stopping him from getting close enough to spray me. The tone to end the class, and the school day, echoed through the arena, and I decided that my timeline had been moved up. Leaving before the test was the only way to spare Emily. 10. Asking for help. Friends can be weird. 1 minute they are fiercely protective, and the next they are making fun of all your favorite things. All in good fun. Be nice, Orville, or I'll tell Mirbo about the ferret you keep in your dorm. Maria threatened through a wicked smile. I didn't know if she meant it, but as somebody who recently did not follow orders when threatened, I didn't think Orville planned to obey her now. Even under the threat of the headmaster finding out about his illegal pet. Emily had made sure I didn't skip dinner again to go hide in the library. I joined her and her friends in the cafe even though I needed to spend as much time in the library as possible. Joseph spit water all over the table. What ferret? You have a ferret in our room. Keep your voice down. Orville clamped a hand over his roommate's mouth. We don't want anyone to find out. I enjoyed watching them razz each other. In my short time knowing this crew, they showed love through teasing. Though I knew how annoyed Maria must have been to bring Headmaster Mirbo into it. Emily didn't join the debate over Oscar the ferret whether or not he was an appropriate pet in favor of her A Study of Classic Runes and How to Use Them book. Scarlett asked for my untouched cookie. I wanted so badly to belong here. If only belonging to this group wasn't going to put my mission in jeopardy more than it already had. Besides, after next week I wouldn't be here anyway. So I feigned exhaustion, a believable act, and went to bed. Except on my way to my dorm, I stopped at the library. It was where I needed to be anyway. Sleep would be there when I got back home to Mom. The librarian had stayed late today. Her glasses were propped in her dark, messy bun, and she seemed to be occupied reading something behind the desk. She did not look up when I approached. Hi, I said quietly, trying to figure out where to start. I was wondering if you knew where I could find books about magic that would make a person disappear. She squinted at me. I realized how young she was. I don't work here. I'm just doing my work-study hours and making sure people put their books away and don't have sex in here. Which I suppose explained why she hadn't been there yesterday. And why she looked so confused when I asked for her help. I guessed people probably didn't bother her much during her work-study hours. Wait, people have sex in here. Gross? She probably didn't have any ideas that I hadn't already ruled out. It didn't hurt to ask, though. Can you point me in the right direction anyway? I thought of a way to explain my search without having to go into my sob story. I was wondering if there was a way to make a person disappear into thin air in a way that isn't traceable and doesn't feel like magic. No, that made it sound like I wanted to disappear someone. I backtracked. I mean, what if someone disappeared in front of my eyes and I wanted to find them, but whatever magic was used isn't traceable? We had tried to track him. Mom and I stayed in that house for 3 months longer than we ever stayed anywhere, trying to get a trace of something that would help. The rule was 6 months in any one place and then move on to a new town and new identities. But we waited to see if any cloaking spell would wear off as time and the elements touched the place where he last stood. No luck. We ran after that. Everything he had been wearing disappeared with him. We couldn't track his phone. There was no activity on his credit cards or bank account. For all intents and purposes, my dad was gone. Like he'd never existed. Well, there's invisibility. The work-study student looked at me oddly. A mix of pity and agitation in her eyes made me uncomfortable. Talking to her had been a mistake. She continued theorizing, not knowing that I'd already written her off. But that usually leaves a residue if you know where to look. Of course, somebody could have teleported them away. Mags who have access to teleportation magic are usually rich and well-connected, because their services are not cheap. But it has been documented that those guys are not the kind of people you want to mess with. If this person was teleported, you're probably never going to find them. That's what I'm afraid of, I said sadly, more to myself than to her. The work-study girl brushed a few strands of hair out of her sympathetic eyes. Her pity made me squeamish. I wanted her to stop looking at me that way. I also thought about time travel, but that's a long shot. She nodded her head in agreement. I thanked her for her help, hoping that my insincerity hadn't been transparent. A real librarian might not have been any more helpful. I did take some solace in knowing that teleportation might be the right path. The sun set beyond the small windows high up on the walls. The work-study student left. I sat alone among the empty aisles and wondered who would want to take my father away. And why? And if it was all my fault? Maybe a powerful someone found out that my parents hadn't turned over their null child. What's worse, they lied on the census. Legally, I was classified as a minor-scale elemental. The Lenores were powerful. And rich. Did they hate me enough to take my dad? Did Jackson know about it? Had they kept him alive all this time? I slammed shut my third book of the evening. I'd yet to find any directions for teleportation, and each new book only confirmed what they first had said. There was no way to recreate the ability to teleport if it wasn't part of your innate power. That power was passed through blood and skipped generations with little to no pattern. Mags who could teleport were highly valued and protected at all costs. The work-study girl was right. I was never going to find my dad. Feeling defeated and tired, I put my books back and left the library when I heard the janitor emptying trash cans. I neither needed nor wanted another lecture. Guilt followed me back to my dorm through the dark halls and the darker quad. The dorm was quiet when I entered. Sane people sleep at night. Soft snores greeted me as I passed several closed doors, and I smiled at the memory of Orville complaining about Joseph. My smile fell from my face when I saw my own door. Open again, just a crack this time. I swore and stomped to the door, heedless of the noise. I wasn't in the mood for more tricks. Expecting the same mess as last night, I pushed open the door to survey that damage. To my surprise, nothing had been touched. Or maybe it was just meant to look that way. I might have been fooled into thinking I'd simply failed to lock the door behind me that morning if I hadn't triple-checked it before breakfast. Red-hot anger coursed through me. Miley, or whoever kept breaking into my room, didn't know who they were messing with. Anger wasn't going to do me any good. I didn't want to prove Jackson right about my magic being dangerous. Tamping down the rage in my chest, I locked the door again and turned back down the hall. My feet carried forward me while my mind was preoccupied. I wasn't going to be able to sleep for a long time anyway. When I got to the stairs leading to the arena, it was only mildly surprising that my body on autopilot would find the one place where I could feel the magic. Dangerous as it was for me to mess with magic, it had a comforting effect. I didn't have a plan to get into the locked subbasement, but it turned out I didn't have to. Noises drifted up the stairwell to me, meaning that the arena was already unlocked. Curiosity got the best of me. I crept down the dark stairs. A few steps from the bottom, I stopped cold. The anger that had dissipated thanks to a walk, and a little healthy curiosity rushed back with a vengeance. I knew those voices. 11. Childhood friends. Standing in the darkness of the stairwell like a creep, I made a plan. It was in my best interest not to interrupt Jackson and Miley in their practice. Logically, I should wait them out, stay hidden until they left. The emotional part of my brain wanted me to storm in there and let loose all of my unpredictable magic on her. But that would just prove Jackson's assumption about nulls. For some reason, I didn't want him to think badly of me. Or at least not any worse than he already did. I figured that if I could get to a large outcropping of rocks, I could wait them out. Once they were gone, I could take advantage of the leftover magic in the space. I could feel just how much power had been wasted and left there. Miley couldn't have unlocked my door from the arena. That didn't mean that she hadn't done it, just that my dorm had probably been open for hours by the time I arrived. If she did it to warn me away from Jackson, it was unnecessary. I didn't want him. Based on their laughter echoing through the arena and the giggles as they shushed each other, their relationship was strong anyway. Logic overpowered the emotional part of me. I pushed the frustration at the drama away from my mind and focused on the plan again. Still bathed in shadow, I peeked around the large open hole that served as the arena entrance. If I was going to make it to the nearest outcropping large enough to hide behind, I'd have to be fast. Magic-powered motion lights lit the arena with a dim glow, making the space darker than it was during classes. The abundant shadows worked in my favor. Of course, so did the magic in the air. If I could soak up even a little magic, maybe I could use it to cover myself and hide in plain sight. Even though I was barely in the arena, I could feel it. Magic, not good, not bad, just alive and buzzing, hung invisibly in the air. It practically begged me to take it, to use it. Nobody else was going to. However, focus too much on your plan, and you might not notice when the other people in the room notice you. What the hell? I jumped at Miley's enraged voice. Caught like a fly in a web. Stealthy, I am not. What are you doing here? Miley started for my not-so-hidden spot in the entryway. Are you spying on us? I thought I told you to stay away from Jackson. She had told me that and I had intended to listen. Had I known they were in the arena, I probably wouldn't have gone there. Even knowing that someone had broken into my room again. Even assuming it had been her. I didn't want to hurt people. Mad as I was at Miley, I knew that the arena, without any wards, was not a good place to be around her. But I'd gone down those stairs, hadn't I, even after recognizing her voice. So I guess a part of me didn't subscribe to non-violence. I'll stay away from you when you stay away from me. Miley's face scrunched up, confused. What are you talking about? She was so close now. In a moment, I wouldn't even need magic to hurt her, I could just use my fist. You know what I'm talking about. I stepped fully into the arena. No point in hiding in the shadows anymore. Quit breaking into my room. Don't touch my stuff. Stop looking for something you're never going to find. She looked confused, but only for a flash, and then she was just angry. You're so dumb if you think that I'd want anything of yours. He would never love you, a dumpy freak like you. Just leave us alone. Miley pulled back her arm, prepared to throw magic at me. What kind of magic, you ask? I never got to find out. Her arm stuck halfway through the motion. Miley looked at her own arm, confused. It did not move, even when she pulled on it with her other hand. Jackson didn't have to touch her to stop her. He was still in the middle of the arena, too far away to have stopped her any other way. Or to stop me, if I planned to retaliate. Miley turned the rest of her body back towards him, as best she could with one arm frozen in place. She seemed to have control over the rest of her body. Are you kidding me? You promised me that she meant nothing to you, she yelled. I knew Jackson could hear the hurt in her voice. To her, it might look like Jackson had stopped her attack to protect me from Miley. He and I both knew that he stopped her so that I wouldn't strike back. Bold of him to assume that I wouldn't strike first even if he was right. Why do we have to have this conversation every time I so much as look at another person? It's exhausting, Miley. Jackson started over to us with a lazy stride, still holding Miley in place. Exhausting. I kill myself every day to look good for you, to be smart enough and popular enough for you, and you don't even notice. That's what's exhausting. Tears gathered in her eyes. Their relationship drama didn't need me around making it worse. The urge to run back to the library to steal all of the books on teleportation and leave was strong. But I can't seem to move. Damn it, Jackson held my feet to the floor. I tested my other limbs, arms moved, all 10 fingers worked, I even bent my knees slightly. He just kept me from running away. But I didn't need my feet to wield magic. The air shifted, feeling lighter as I drank in the latent magic in the arena. Fear took over Jackson's face. His steps increased, losing the too cool air he had moments before. That fear. I'd seen it before. Jackson was afraid of me. Miles, Rochelle and I go way back. We were childhood friends and I haven't seen her in a decade. That's it. When he was close enough to touch her, Jackson released Miley's arm. She jerked her free hand away when he reached for it. Is this like when you knew that Charity Case knew some kid? You know she still has a crush on you, right? Miley rubbed her wrist, though I knew from experience that Jackson's magic didn't hurt, and didn't leave a mark. I wanted to smack her for talking about Emily that way but couldn't reach her. You know what, you can have both of them. I hate you, she spat at him. You're a liar and they are freaks. You all deserve each other. I did not watch her storm out of the arena. The look on Jackson's face was indiscernible as he watched her go. Neither of us spoke. Eventually, the silence grew too awkward. So, I'm going to go now. Jackson nodded. That's a good idea. But he did not release me. I cleared my throat after a moment. He finally looked at me, seeing me for the first time that night. He was calm when he spoke. You should leave. I won't report you. You just need to go before anyone gets hurt. Though I agreed, I didn't have the answers I'd come looking for. I can't leave the Magiscola yet. I haven't found what I came here for. And what is that? A clue. Even just a small one. Something that would get me one step closer to finding my dad. My dad, I told him honestly. Trust is earned, maybe if I showed him that I could be trusted, he would prove to be trustworthy in return. I would have noticed if your dad was at my Magiscola. Jackson's frown matched his disbelief. No, I'm looking for information that might help me find him. He's been missing for a while. And what am I supposed to do until you find him? Jackson asked. He stood before me as a softer version of the boy who insulted and threatened me only yesterday. He wasn't exactly the same little boy I remembered. No amount of softness would take away from the muscles in his arms or those beautiful eyes. But I could see my old friend in Jackson's face, all grown up. I wanted to hold him. Help me. 12 of threats and winks for someone who went to bed early last night. You look like shit. Thanks. I tried to smile at Scarlett. The urge to yawn overcame me, and I covered my mouth so she wouldn't see. At least I don't look like him, I said, jerking my thumb toward Joseph with his head down on the table, buried in his arms. Sure, I hadn't slept, even if I'd spent more than a few hours in my room. I wouldn't have been able to sleep knowing that it was so easy for someone, anyone, to break in. The time I did spend in my dorm was wasted trying to convince myself that my bargain with Jackson had been the right thing to do. By the time the sun rose, I'd showered, dressed, and still not come to the conclusion that working with him was smart. How long do you need? He had asked. 1 week. And then I'm gone, I promised. I meant it. I wouldn't be here when the Omega trial rolled around. Meet me in the library after dark. Tell anybody and I'll deny it. I ignored the sliver of joy I felt at the thought of spending time with him. Instead, I replayed his threats in my head. The hatred in his eyes. The fear. I shivered, remembering the slur he had used on day one. Void Mage. Was that really only 2 days ago? Joseph's miserable voice cut through my thoughts. You laugh at my heartbreak. He picked his head up to give us a wet stare. Quit being so dramatic, man, Orville piped in. This isn't the first time, and it won't be the last. There will be other girls. Joseph howled. The sound drew the attention of the surrounding tables. Scarlett stiffened beside me. Luckily, it was still early and most students were too tired to care. Even Emily hadn't made it to the cafe for breakfast yet. Not like her. She was the one, he moaned, hanging his head. I have loved her from afar for years and Archie swoops in before I can make a move. He's a junior. I gave Scarlett a look, mouthing who. She whispered back, Harmony Gold, she's in our year. Joseph has had a crush on her since he got here. The name wasn't one I recognized. She could have been anyone at the Magiscola. There were so many students I would never get the chance to meet. Not for the first time, that morning I wished that I would be around to see how it all played out. Granted, you've been saying for years that you were going to ask her out and didn't. How many times have you spoken? Orville asked, not trying to hide his smile. Joseph just sniffed sadly in response. Scarlett's hand thrust into the air and waved excitedly. Oh, I know. Pick me. Before anyone had the chance to pick her, she said, 3. He talked to her 3 times. That averages to once a year over his career at BPM. Misery pulled Joseph's head back toward the table, and he buried himself in his arms again. I knew their teasing was all in good fun, that it came from a place of love, but seeing someone I liked so desolate broke my heart. I wanted Joseph and the rest of the group to remember me as kind, rather than the person who initiated Joseph's torment. Hey Joseph, I said gently. He kept his face hidden when I patted his arm to get his attention. Would you like my muffin? It's banana chocolate chip, and it has healing properties. He rolled his head to one side to look sideways at me, his chin-length black hair covering most of his face. No joke. My mom's a healer. She prescribes these all the time. None of her patients have ever died. That I know of. The table waited as Joseph considered. Slowly, he slid one hand toward my proffered treat and pulled it back to his face. After a minute of staring at the muffin, he sat up. We held our breath while he pinched off a large piece and popped it into his mouth. Joseph savored the muffin while savoring all the attention we willingly gave him. Joseph met my eyes. He wiped away a non-existent tear and smiled at me. Tell your mom she's a genius and I love her. We laughed at him and the world was right again. Well worth the price of a banana chocolate chip muffin. In the midst of rejoicing that Joseph had been cured of his heartbreak, Emily joined the table with her breakfast in hand. Oh good, Joseph is here. I heard his melancholy twin had made an appearance, but I'm glad to see that's not the case. The group moved on to discuss what Harmony and Archie's babies would look like, though it didn't seem to bother Joseph much. This was exactly how the movies taught me friendship would be, laughing together, enjoying each other's company, celebrating the highs, and commiserating the lows. I wanted to commit every second to memory. But someone was missing. I turned to Emily to ask where Maria was. Emily shot a sideways glance over at Joseph before quietly explaining, Maria has a hard time being around Joseph when he claims to have a broken heart. I think he's the only person in the world who doesn't know how she feels about him. That made 2 of us. I hadn't suspected a thing. He'll have forgotten the whole thing by lunch and the group will be back together, she continued between bites. Who saved him from himself this time? I think I helped, I shrugged, looking down at my empty tray. Gave him a muffin and told him it was magic. It was what my mom did for me after the Lenores left, and after Dad disappeared. Emily beamed and held out a hand for a high five. The way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Be careful, he'll fancy himself in love with you next. Joseph, having heard that last part, blew me a kiss from across the table. I caught it, smiling. I was going to miss this. Plus, adrenaline was the only thing keeping me awake by the time I got to the library. It wasn't quite dark yet, but I had research to do whether or not Jackson was around to help. Footsteps sounded behind me. Think of the devil, and he shall appear. Jackson set a cup on the table next to Mither to go kind with a lid. At least, he attempted to put it next to me. There were so many books and scattered pages of notes that the table was covered everywhere in arm's reach. His choice was between a far empty spot or setting the drink on my notes. You looked dead on your feet in Commender. I watched Richard get you twice, even though you had the clear advantage. So that was my Commender partner's name. The chair across the table creaked as Jackson plopped down into it. His eyes flicked to the drink he'd placed on the table. Coffee's for you. Seems like you might need it. The smell of coffee wafted from the cup to tickle my senses. It begged me to lift the lid and set it free to engulf the room in a rich, heady cloud. Maybe I was tired. Eyeing him suspiciously, I ignored the cup. I didn't think he planned to poison me or anything. He had agreed to help me, after all. It just wasn't like Jackson to be so nice. I handed him my list instead. I'm really working the teleportation angle, but take a look and see if I missed any possible theories. I'd been over the list again and again. The only plausible explanation was teleportation. Every book the library had on the subject was on the table in front of me. Jackson took my list complete with ideas I crossed off, notes, a small drool stain, and too many question marks. That piece of paper was the culmination of every theory we had come up with in the past 3 years. We just didn't know enough. Mom's experience was in healing, not in all the ways to make a man disappear. Time travel. Jackson laughed. If he'd traveled in time, your timeline would have been messed up if you existed at all. Amused, he glanced at me, then at the coffee. It was an invitation I did not want to accept, especially when all he was doing was laughing at me. It wasn't exactly helpful. I glared at him. He held his hands palm out in surrender. Okay, I'll be serious. He started the list again. I don't see parallel universe or alternate reality on here. Are you set on teleportation? I tried to keep the list to magic that existed 3 years ago. I defended myself. Time travel, though. This conversation wasn't getting me any closer to leaving. I frowned at him. It was a long shot. Drink the coffee, Rochelle. The corner of Jackson's mouth twitched. I'm glad you find me so funny, I grumped. I resented his kindness. The coffee tasted great despite my sour mood. Don't think I won't hesitate to take you out if I think someone is going to get hurt, he promised. There was little malice in his words, but I knew them to be the truth. I didn't have time to wonder if Jackson's problem was with me as a null, or if he just didn't want a bystander to end up in the line of fire. Jackson reached for the next book in my stack and opened it to the table of contents. We stayed quiet for a while, reading too intently to chat, occasionally scribbling notes. My coffee did not last long. Once or twice I caught his eye. I wasn't watching him, I swear. I read the same paragraph 3 times, trying to ignore Jackson chewing on his pen. While it is possible to teleport instantaneously from one location to another, not all mags have the power to transport living things. In studies where the conveyance of a human was possible, only 1 out of 5 mags were able to also teleport that person's clothing and belongings. Only one study proved fatal for the person being transported. It went on to describe the gruesome failure. I skipped over that part. Eventually, I closed my book with a disappointed thump and rubbed my hands over my face. This was pointless. Jackson closed his book as well. He set it aside and stretched, then reached for another. Need a break? My jaw would have hit the floor if I hadn't clenched it. I don't have the luxury of coming back to this problem later, Jackson. I'll be gone in a week whether or not I have answers. My original timeline gave me a month to find something viable. Knowing I'd changed the plan by doing all the things I said I wasn't going to, making friends, using too much magic, agreeing to join a club, didn't help my stress levels. Let's try another tactic then, Jackson offered gently, the look on his face indecipherable. Brainstorm with me and save those poor books from a beating. Your frustration shouldn't mean they should suffer. Why are you being so kind to me? I demanded. I'm not, was his quick response. Think of my assistance as an extracurricular. I help you on your way and keep you from hurting anyone in the meantime. So you've said. I couldn't help it if I grumbled at him. His broken record assurances were getting old. Just making sure you don't hurt anyone. You'll notice that I have conveniently hurt exactly 0 people since I've been here. And that's because I've been watching. He winked at me. One day, threats. The next, winking. Before I could sputter a response, Jackson said, maybe we can talk through this. Tell me what happened that day. So I did. 13, memories. The memory settled over me, clear as the day it happened. In my mind I was back in the yard of the little blue house in the woods. My father stood blocking my way. I heard the screen door slam, my mother going back inside to let Dad deal with me this time. We were arguing. I was 14 and I thought I knew everything. He just wanted me to be safe, to keep my magic contained. We just want you to be safe. You deserve a normal life. I don't want a normal life. It was the last time we had that argument. 1 minute he was there, close enough that I could touch him. Then I blinked and he was just gone. I remembered just wanting him to leave me alone. Being back there in that moment, in those emotions, I hated my younger self. In the present, I squeezed my eyes together to fight off the tears. He had worn jeans and a flannel shirt, blue and white. There was an ink stain on the pocket. He hadn't shaved for a few days, and his 5 o'clock shadow made him look weathered and old. In that instant, the birds stopped chirping. There was no wind. It was like the world stopped moving. I called out for him, but he didn't come. The days that followed stretched out like years. I stayed awake for as long as I could, waiting for him to come back. He never did. And when it wasn't safe to be there anymore, Mom and I left. Jackson's voice pulled me out of the memory. What was your father's magic? I was grateful to be in the quiet library, with him instead of in the yard where I'd last seen my father. Holding back tears, I smiled tightly at the book on the table. I couldn't quite meet Jackson's eyes. Knowledge, ironically. He was the kind of psionic that nobody ever wanted to be. My dad remembered everything he'd ever heard or seen. He could recreate any fight from a movie or imitate any accent as long as he saw or heard it. My uncle Andrew used to call him a parrot. Dad had a whole collection of parrots from years of Christmas gag gifts. Being vulnerable in front of Jackson felt wrong. Wasting my time telling stories felt worse. Once I got started, I couldn't stop myself. They were creepy parrots. My dad loved them anyway. Mom threatened to leave him if he kept hiding them all over the house for her to find in the cabinets and stuff. She lost it over the little one in her shoe. From the corner of my eye, I saw Jackson smile. The air in the room felt breathable again, where it had been weighed down with stress before. Who knew Jackson would be the one to pull me out of my desperation and help me refocus? Not that I planned to tell him that. I actually remember that. Excitement danced in Jackson's eyes. He sat up straighter, leaning slightly forward over the table. Your mom was so mad about her shoes that she threw them at him from the window. And then kept throwing different pairs when she missed. I remember that part, because I thought it was odd that your parents laughed with each other when your mom threw stuff at your dad. I opened my mouth to comfort Jackson, but closed it without saying anything. That was a side of him he didn't show me when we were kids. Quickly, to cover up the secret he had just spilled, he asked, "Why do you think someone would want to kidnap your dad?" That was a question I didn't have a good answer to. The only one I had ever been able to come up with wasn't one I wanted to admit to. It often kept me up at night. Nulls are dangerous. Most parents gave up any child who classified as null before they got too attached. It was safer that way for everybody. If someone tried to hide a null, they were strictly punished, made to be an example. Yet my parents hid me. They falsified my classification, and we moved often to keep our secret. I feared that someone had found out about me, about what my parents had done. I feared it was my fault that he was gone. And a part of me feared my mother knew it. She allowed me to risk myself by coming to a Magiscola because the problem was mine to fix. Worse than that fear was the very real possibility that my father hadn't been stolen or teleported at all. I couldn't rule out that maybe my unpredictable magic made him go away. So instead I lied to Jackson. I don't know. And that's when I could no longer hold back the flood of tears. Good thing the library was as heavily warded as the rest of the school. Lack of sleep and uncontrollable emotions plus magic is a terrible combination for nulls. That equation would have made me a very risky person to be around. I swiped at my face with my hands. Jackson didn't want me at his school. He certainly did not want to sit with me while I cried. His chair scraped over the thin carpet of the library floor. When he threw his arms around me, I stiffened in surprise, but did not back away. His arms felt exactly like I'd assumed, powerful in a way that had nothing to do with magic. All at once, I was warm and safe and it felt like everything was going to be okay. After a moment, I was able to speak again. "I'm getting snot all over your shirt." It was too nice of a shirt for tears, and whatever else was leaking out of my face. "Are you done crying?" Jackson retorted without letting go. I considered telling him no to see if he would keep holding me. There was nothing wrong with enjoying the soothing comfort of his embrace, right? "I'm okay now." I couldn't help but wonder about his motives. The embrace ended after a brief moment of hesitation. Jackson settled back into his chair across the table and turned to a new section in his book without another word. I fought the urge to thank him. It was embarrassing enough to have cried in the first place, but every time I looked at him I saw my tear stains on his shirt. Heat gathered in my chest even as the warmth of his arms faded. I needed an excuse to leave the library to go collect myself. Clearing my throat awkwardly, I delivered my lame excuse. "Is the cafe open late?" "I think I need more coffee." Jackson did not look up at me when he responded. "There's no staff at this hour, but the cafe is open so you can use the machines. Won't be fresh, but caffeine is caffeine." I stood, trying to make myself small, and not attract attention, which was stupid since we were the only ones there and Jackson had already seen me ugly cry. Taking my to-go cup, Jackson hadn't brought one for himself, but I planned to bring an extra back, just in case I headed for the stairs. Mere feet from the entry, Jackson yelled my name. Turning, I saw him leaning over the railing on the second floor, a book in his hand. "Rochelle," he repeated with growing excitement. "Did you see this list of families who can teleport?" The ghosts of librarians past shushed him, but we couldn't hear them. If you yell in a library and there's no librarian to hear, do you make a sound? I knew the list. I'd found it my first night here, but none of the names stuck out to me. Yeah, I saw it a couple nights ago. What about it? I called back. I know a Montgomery, he said. We need to talk to Claire. What lies hidden in the fog of magic? What is the truth behind Rochelle's father's disappearance? To be the first to unravel these mysteries, subscribe to our channel, and let us take you deep into every corner of the magical world.